now request Mr. Vaibhav Vohra, Managing Director, Continental Careers Private Limited.
Good afternoon, everyone. Warm regards to my fellow panelists. I would just like to start by, touching on the developments on the overall logistics infrastructure. So when we talk about infrastructure, one wise man very aptly said that infrastructure is the backbone of any economy. And when we talk about this economic, the economy and the growth of an economy, infrastructure is one piece, which is physical infrastructure. So physical infrastructure, your seaports, airports, dry ports, and all other related such investments need to work seamlessly together. So there's a big play on digital infrastructure, which is absolutely needed to drive coordination amongst all of this. So see, when we run even organizations that we're all part of, are large organizations, how do you remove friction? You remove friction by increasing information flow. So when such infrastructure is focused on, and again, I'd like to congratulate the government with regard to the initiatives that they've done with the Gati Shakti and so much, and especially customs as well with their digital initiatives on how the seamless information flow is helping the movement of goods across. So this is something that will enhance exports because we are part of a global supply chain. And this global supply chain revolves around goods coming from various countries into India, being worked upon and sent outwards. So when we focus on these hard infrastructures, we need to keep a view on the digital piece as well. And I see that that's something that we are doing so, because these things will only strengthen our resolve as a country. Looking at becoming a large export hub for the world, our value proposition has been our strong workforce or our youth work that's going to start coming in and going to get skilled. So this value proposition needs to be brought in and cannot be offset by a high logistics expense. We're all talking about how we want to bring this down from 14% to 8%. But how do you do that without being able to bring in a seamless interaction within the already available infrastructure? Now, this already available infrastructure has had investments, and now to be able to generate return is what we are sitting on. So, on looking at a China plus one strategy, that's also what institutional buyers are looking towards. In our conversations, what we are seeing is they want to see stability in the decisions. So they want to see resolve and follow through on those decisions. So if there's a policy, and at least what we see today is the introduction of policies like the National Logistics Policy and the Gati Shakti, there is an interest and an intent to bring these disciplines together and to reduce the friction, because the end goal is the same. We all want to promote the exports. We all want to promote merchandise export. We want to increase manufacturing. But in order to do that, all of us have to work collectively, and not within our entire area of expertise, but towards a collective goal that has to be achieved. So it's wonderful to see that industry players and policymakers have all started to give the much desired attention to logistics today. It's also the digital piece that needs the necessary play, especially with the ONDC coming up. I think we're going to have to leapfrog into the future. We can't afford to take one step at a time and go there, because we're already competing in the world of Amazons and Alibabas. So if you have to compete there, you have to be able to come up, and that is what you see with the acceptance. And I think in the previous session, we were talking about the GEM portal and how it's become one of the largest, platforms for purchase. The same thing exists now with the ONDC. If you're going to look at the online digital distribution through one single platform, and all our domestic manufacturers are going to get an opportunity to put their produce on this digital platform, you need a supply chain that can cater to this supply, and a standardized supply chain. It's not, something which is at random. It has to be something which flows in the same uniformity across. So again, while we are talking about the digital piece, I'd also like to stress upon the overall implementation of policy. So there has been great wisdom already applied by individual stakeholders to put in a lot of effort to design or devise infrastructure concepts, but to see them through and work with respective authorities and multi-disciplines is where the challenge sits. So I believe the NLP is something that NLP and Gati Shakti definitely will add value to that. And obviously giving them teeth is what makes all the difference, because working and getting things done when there are larger, ministerial initiatives at play is always difficult. So having a mantle of logistics or somebody taking the baton of logistics to move this forward, because that is the only way you will be able to bring in a lot of competitive efficiencies and match up to the global competitors we are all competing with. Because exports is not something which is a local subject. It's something where you're global and you're competing with everyone on the same platform globally. So they're all things that you get. And again, similarly, like you get support on the finance side with the foreign exchange and financial controls, the same thing has to come in with infrastructure and logistics as well. So, with the authorities striving to achieve this objective of turning India into a global manufacturing hub with self-sufficiency, we should leverage our strengths to take advantage of the market opportunities and work diligently on our weaknesses to secure ourselves against hurdles which are going to hamper the price and our development together. Thank you.
Now we are eagerly awaiting to hear Mr. Vivek Johri. When we talk of trade facilitation, we can't have a better person than Mr. Johri, who has been an author on changing the policies and has played a key role and is playing key role in seeing that how the reform process is fast-tracked, whether it is in customs, in taxation. Sir, we are really looking forward to have your views.
Very good afternoon to all of you, Mr. Budia, and my other co-panelists, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. Let me begin by thanking CII for having me over once again to talk about trade facilitation. But there'll be a slight difference in emphasis this time. In the past, I've mainly focused on trade facilitation from the point of view of imports, because a lot of work has already happened and some of it was talked about by the earlier speakers. Either by way of digitization, business process re-engineering, or in so many different ways, we've introduction of the single window, which we did in record time in India. So there's been quite a lot of ground that we've already covered on the import side. And of course, there is an argument that if you take some measures on the import side, eventually it goes to benefit exporters as well, because a large part of exports are dependent on import of intermediates, raw materials, and other things. I'm going to speak today from the CBIC perspective. And when I came in, I asked the organizers why they'd slotted me along with infrastructure and, in this session, because I thought here you were going to discuss core physical infrastructure that is required for moving exports across the border. I'm also going to throw in a little bit of insight, if I may call it that, based on my experience as the Chief Commissioner at Nhava Sheva Port a couple of years ago. Now you know that although customs is a regulatory agency normally associated with collection of taxes at the border, when the trade facilitation agreement was signed, we were given a very prominent role in implementing the trade facilitation agreement, and particularly in ensuring that the agencies at the border work in a coordinated, concerted way to achieve the objectives of the trade facilitation agreement. And one of the main indicators, that we were focusing on and continue to do so is obviously the average release time of cargo, whether it's import or export. So we've been assigned the task of measuring and then monitoring and very actively, or rather proactively, trying to compress the average release time both for import and export cargo. And many of you would be aware that the National Committee on Trade Facilitation, which was created after we started implementing the trade facilitation agreement, has actually set targets for average release time. And for exports, the targets are pretty ambitious. The current Trade Facilitation Action Plan, which ends in 2023, had set a target of an average release time of 24 hours for export cargo on the sea side, and only 12 hours, on the export side for air. So that's why, we've been very consciously working on reducing the average release time. Just, for the sake of better understanding, the release time that I'm talking about is measured from the point of arrival of the goods into a port till their actual departure. So, of course, there is a leg that of journey that the goods undertake before that. But, the average release time we're talking about is after the goods have arrived at the port. So, we are required to play this role of a coordinating agency. Not always a pleasant thing to do. Let me share with you, there's so many stakeholders at the border in a port, and very often you have to sort of bang their heads together and get the outcomes that you're looking for. The good news is that the average release time for exports, and we've been doing a TRS study every year from 2017 onwards, although there's been a change in methodology in the last 2 years. But even if you were to ignore the change in methodology, I'm quite confident in sharing with you that the average release time for export cargo has also, we've been able to reduce it to half of what it was when we started measuring it. And that, I think, is quite a creditable thing, for which obviously all the stakeholders all across India, different ports, they deserve the credit, because every agency and every stakeholder that is involved in movement of goods has played its role in helping us achieve that. But that is not to say that we've been able to achieve the target that has been laid out for us. And as I shared with you, the target is quite stiff. It is 24 hours for sea cargo and 12 hours for air cargo. So the distance from the target is still something that we need to work on. So one of the things that we've done is to review our export processes, and we've taken several measures already to streamline them further. But I must admit before you that, we've been focused more on the import side all these years, even though we've been measuring the release time on the export side as well. So obviously, what the trade would need to know is what is our strategy for further work on reducing release time for exports. And there are some areas that we're working on already. But before I come to that, I do want to share, based on my experience at Navashiva, that if you looked at the composition of the average release time, which still continues to be more than 100 hours for sea cargo, you'll find that the time taken by regulatory agencies after arrival of cargo till what we call the let export order, or the permission to export the goods, is given by customs. That is actually a very small component of the overall average release time. And I think that is where the participants who are sitting around the table today have a very important role to play. Because I find that, I'm not saying that we've reached the end of history as far as customs processes on the export side are concerned, and we've reached an ideal state. Of course, there is room for compression, further compression in the release time that is taken by regulatory agencies. And there are 2 or 3 important steps that we are contemplating and that we are working on, and I'll share with you what those are. But the big point that I want to make is that almost 80 to 85% of the average release time is taken up by movement of cargo after customs have given the permission to export and before it's put on the ship. So that's something for, I think, all of you sitting around this table to think about, because that speaks to, either the quality of physical infrastructure or, the efficiency with which that infrastructure is working. Otherwise, it's difficult to understand why, that leg of the journey should take so long. One of the reasons when I think about it is the information gap. And I think Mr. Vohra talked about it, in the context of digitization. I think we need to very proactively think about how we can provide real-time information to exporters and other stakeholders who are carting goods into a port for shipment abroad. I'll tell you why that matters. So what I used to notice is that because of uncertainty and because of lack of information about when a ship would be available, how much time would a container take to move from, let's say, the parking plaza to the terminal, or from a CFS to the terminal, exporters who are anxious to put their goods on a vessel would play it very safe. And the cargo would get carted in very often even 10 days in advance or 15 days in advance. I think that's a very wasteful way of managing infrastructure. And the only missing link, as I see it, is the availability of information. So, from the customs side, what we've enabled is that we've allowed exporters to stuff their containers at their factory premises. The goods are examined while they're in their factory or their warehouse. They're put inside a container. An electronic seal is affixed on the container. It's it's a smart seal which can be scanned and read. It contains the basic data about the consignment. And the container is then carted into the parking plaza. And, the goods are registered in case examination is required, because the shipping bill has already been filed. And after examination, customs would give their what we call the let export order, or the permission to export. Now, because the person is not sure of how much time it's going to take for the vessel to dock and for the movement of cargo from the parking plaza to the terminal, that he carts the goods in a good 10 or 15 days in advance. And that obviously enhances, the average release time of cargo. So, and I think this is not rocket science. It just requires a digital solution to be able to share this information publicly on a platform. These days, there are a lot of mobile apps, perhaps, which can be created to enable this information to travel to the exporter. What we are trying to do as far as customs is concerned is that currently we still have a physical process for registration of cargo on the export side, which means that the broker has to actually come in with the documents physically into the parking plaza to register the goods. And that's the time the seal is scanned. And if it's intact, further processing is done. But we are actively working on a system where a web-based registration of goods would be possible, which would mean that there's no need for any broker or an exporter to actually travel to a port to submit the documents to customs for initiating the process before the let export order is given. So that's one thing that that's an idea that we're actually working on. The second thing is, I'm sure all of you are familiar with the single window, which we've introduced on the import side. We are trying to introduce something similar on the export side, because there are export consignments that require regulatory intervention, let's say from the drug controller or the food authorities, or other agencies which are at the border, the wildlife control agency, for example. Now, we are trying to integrate electronically our systems, which is iSkate, with these agencies, so that through an API, a no objection can be conveyed by the regulatory agency to the customs system. And then, there would be no need for a physical mode of interaction with us, or for the exporter or his broker to run to the regulatory agency to get a no objection certificate. So these are two, I think, big ideas that we are working on. And, I think these will help further compress, the release time that we are taking, before we give let export order. But as I said, the problem is not there. The problem, I think, is on the overall physical infrastructure at the port, which I think all of you need to think about and work out a solution on how we can improve that part of the journey. And I do recall, I'm sure things have improved, but I do recall that Nhava Sheva, from the parking plaza to the terminal, there were times when it would take 8 to 10 hours for a container to actually move. And I think that's completely unacceptable if you really want to reduce the logistics cost, because eventually the turnover of trucks and containers is something that, if it's quickened, then it obviously reduces your logistics costs. So that's very simple arithmetic. A couple of other initiatives which should be of interest to exporters, and I presume some of them are here today, that I would like to talk about in 2 minutes, is one, you would have noticed that we've completely automated the RODTEP and ROSTEL schemes, and they're working. So earlier, these scripts were issued by DGFT, then they had to be brought physically to customs, they had to be registered on our system, and then, we used to actually manually debit each time a shipping bill was filed, or a bill of entry was filed. Each time, there was a debit that was required to be made. Now, end to end, the entire system, in collaboration with DGFT, we've automated the whole process. We rolled it out last year. And so the script is issued electronically, it can be generated, in fact, by the exporter. So the credit is given into the exporter's ledger. And on that basis, depending on the time that's convenient to him, he generates a script on the system, and it gets automatically linked to a bill of entry that is filed for import of raw materials or consumables or whatever else. So that's a, I think, very big facilitation move. It has already majorly reduced the time that we take, to roll out these benefits to exporters. We are also very actively monitoring the drawback release time. This was a concern which was raised by the industry when we did a review of, our processes in the National Trade Facilitation Committee just about a month and a half, 2 months ago. And we found that the time we were taking to, to process drawback claims has really gone out of whack. And, we are trying to monitor that regularly, and we're trying to bring it down, to the targeted levels, which is legally, of course, we're allowed 30 days to clear a drawback claim. But we've now reached a stage where we're doing about 60% of the drawback claims within that time. So, but we're monitoring it. And of course, we will continue to do that and improve that further. And please remember that the ROSTEL and RODTEP schemes also piggyback on the drawback claims. So if we hasten the process of drawback disbursals, then those claims also get, an automatic leg up. So I think I'll just stop here, and I'll be happy to take any questions that you might have.